Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Revere's Department of Planning and Community Development Urban Land Institute Squire Road project. A little background about this project. Back in April of this year, myself, along with my colleagues, the former Director of Community Development, Tech Lang, and the Small Business Liaison for the City, John Festa, put in a request with the Urban Land Institute to study Squire Road. The request was to look at alternative land use patterns, the zoning, also as well as the use of housing and opportunities to bring in and increase job opportunities for residents in the area. We also were looking to how we can activate our open space in the area to bring in multimodal transportation. So today, the representatives from the technical assistance panel assembled by the Urban Land Institute spent the day with the City of Revere. It started off with a tour of Squire Road, where they were presented with all of the different developments, housing, infrastructure, and retail that is currently on the corridor. It was followed by 2 panel sessions where residents, business owners, developers, and city staff participated. They have been here all day, and tonight they're going to be presenting their recommendations for Squire Road. It'll include anything from development, zoning, reissues, transportation, infrastructure improvements. But we will be using this plan to seek funding for master plans for the area, or as well as to start looking at how we want to see the area in the future. So I'm going to introduce the panel. So we're starting off with our real estate development vice president from Winco, Andrew Colbert. Then it is followed by developer and financial expert from Trinity, Aaron Hone. Representing Mass Development is Matthew Stacio. Our co-chair, Emily Ines, who's representing the urban planning of the panel. James Heffernan, Real Estate Law Foundation. He is also the other co-chair. To my right, I have Mike Bryan, Sustainability Manager from ULI. And I also have Tim Moore to my left, who's the Economic Development Real Estate Manager for ULI. And last, we have the top recorder or panelist is Colleen Brewster, and she is an architect, and she's also worked on many projects here in the city. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to present what they saw today, the existing conditions, and what they think we can do for the corridor. And this is just the first step of many for us to really start reimagining and revisioning Squire Road.
Thank you. Do we have the presentation on the screen? All right, there it is. All right, thank you for the introduction. I'm Attorney Jim Heffernan of Rich May PC, co-chair of the TAP panel, giving a brief background on ULI first. The Urban Land Institute is a global member-driven organization, 45,000 real estate and urban planning design professionals globally. Boston, New England is focused primarily of most of New England, a lot in the greater Boston area, with 1,300 members, developers, architects, attorneys, public officials, even students. Technical assistant panels, they give a background on that. It is usually co-sponsored with Mass Development, like the one was today. It is a community-focused panel diving into a particular question or area requested by a town or community. It pulls together a number of professionals from the ULI membership, and it's important to note that we are full-time professionals donating our time, volunteering our time to dive into these issues, and love doing it. This is, I forget how many taps Emily and I have done together, let alone outside of this. and with Emily. It's always with a focus to benefit the community, bring an outside opinion, look at a number of assets, liabilities, challenges, and we'll go over that tonight. But it is to try to answer the questions from the community on that particular TAP project, have tonight's hearing, and then have a written report. So this isn't the end of it. This is just the end of a long day for many of us. As noted, the panel sponsors are Mass Development and the City of Revere. I'll turn it over to Emily.
Good evening. My name is Emily Ennis. I'm an urban planner and designer and principal of Ennis Associates. And as Jim said, delighted to be here. We as professionals find TAPs very rewarding. And you can see the names of the professionals that are here. It's important to understand that we come in for frequently the first time to see a community, to see an area of a community. Some of us have some past experience of Revere, which is perfect for us for this TAP. But the point of this exercise is to bring a set of fresh eyes to a problem that a community has had, and then do this sort of come in, have a look at things, give you our first impressions tonight, and then this follow-up report that Jim mentioned. So if we go to the next slide, we can see where our areas is, this Squire Road corridor, which has an interesting mix of uses along it. It's got a very defined split down Squire Road with residential and small business on one side, and then a much more, I think my favorite word out of this whole day was hodgepodge of uses on the other side. And so in this particular TAP, next slide please, we're going to end the one after that. We've been asked to address three main questions. And these questions are really about what can happen here. So how do we enhance the area's diversification of uses? Yes, there are already diverse uses there, but it's not quite what the city is looking for, and in some of what we've heard today, not quite what stakeholders are looking for. How do we figure out urban design goals for the area that would address the identity of the area? What the current uses are and what they should be, and then thinking about smart growth. And smart growth can mean different things for different communities. In this case, we're looking at an area that has not just the uses, not just a regional aspect, but also a significant environmental aspect as well. So what does smart growth mean for a community like that? Rethinking green space around the area, rethinking how that enhances the surrounding neighborhoods, as well as Squire Road itself, how we link to the Northern Strand Community Path, again, local versus regional. And then one of the ways to make new things happen is to rethink the existing zoning. So what do we do with the existing zoning? What recommendations would we make for that? So next slide, please. So our process began with a briefing meeting. The city provided us with a lot of information. I think it was about a week and a half ago, actually. It wasn't that long. So we've done a little bit of due diligence ahead. Typically, you'll find that panelists will go to the briefing meeting, and then we'll do our own bits of research based on our professional abilities. So we bring something more to the day of the meeting. We kicked off this morning around 8:30 with our official start of the tour, and we're lucky enough to have a guided tour of the area and get out at a couple of places, really see the things that we had just read about before. Some of us, again, were already familiar with the area. And then we spent a few hours this morning, immediately after the tour, doing stakeholder interviews. And stakeholders are people who have an interest or an understanding of an area. They may be property owners, they may be residents, they may be city or state officials. We had all of those and city staff. So it's important to us to hear from a variety of voices when we do an event like this. So we get a complete picture of the physical, of the experience of living, working, or owning property in the area, and get a sense of what people think of as important, where they see assets and where they see challenges. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to talk about actually, sorry, I've got two more. My apologies, Aaron. So if we skip to what we saw, here are some of the pictures from our site view. We took a couple of photos. You'll see there's a lot of pavement, and we're going to discuss that. And there's something when we talk about placemaking, which is how you express the identity of an area in physical form, and also how you attract people to an area, how you give them that sense that there really is something there. There is a common phrase you'll hear in planning and design circles. There's not much sense of there. So one of that is one of the things we look at is how do you increase the vitality of an area? How do you express its identity through design and physicality? And then on the next slide, just as a way of thinking about what's going on here, these are two aspects of what's going on in terms of traffic. Who's coming to the Northgate Shopping Center? Where are they going? Why are they going? So these will be better visualized in the report, but it calls out who lives here, who's traveling because they work here, who's traveling because of some of the draws to the area, and then how long are they staying in the area. One thing that we sometimes talk about is how people do more than one thing in an area at a time. I've had some developer friends call those sticky areas, like a sticky website. How do you get somebody to come to your website and stay? It's true of a place as well. How do you get somebody to do their daily shopping and run some errands and meet a friend for a coffee, all in the same place? So we look for things like that as well. And now I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Oh, great, excellent. So we just wanted to showcase initially some of the initial themes that we heard throughout the tour, and as well as the two panels that we were able to engage with stakeholders with today. A lot of these are pretty obvious, considering that the site is having a large highway running through it. Traffic being a big one, the number of cars that come here and there, people getting onto and off of Squire Road, and coming along with that, pedestrian safety, people that are looking to walk or traverse Squire Road or looking to get to the other side, the ability for cars, motorists to feel safe as they're going to and fro is another theme that was highlighted. The number of businesses, as we drove along Squire Road today, just highlighting that many of the businesses are quite similar, so either fast food chains, nail salons, things of that nature, but not a whole lot of diversity that a place like this could likely see and accommodate, and are obviously uses that people have highlighted during the stakeholder meetings that we held. Also as well, the infrastructure and capacity. We had, through the discussions today, highlighted the fact that a lot of the infrastructure in place hasn't been replaced in decades. And this is definitely an opportunity now, as we're all looking at what could be new about this environment, of making sure that if something new is coming in, that it's being able to be serviced well by either water or sewer or electricity, so that those uses can survive and be plentiful for the people that are looking to use them in the future. And finally, looking at the idea of this being either regional or local. This corridor is bookended by both Route 107 and also Route 1, which service other parts of the greater Boston region. But also, this is a road that is used a lot by Revere residents, and trying to understand the dynamic of what is the mix, what is the balance that we're looking to achieve here in our recommendations, of making sure that we're prioritizing the folks that are utilizing this corridor on a regular basis, and making sure that their interests are being heard and respected and reflected in our recommendations. So looking forward at the assets and opportunities that we came to see during today, for how many motorists and pedestrians come through this corridor, it is obvious that this place receives a lot of attention. And because of that, there's an opportunity to serve a lot of people in this corridor based on the number of people that are currently going through it, past it, interacting with it, that there's going to be a large audience for whatever the new development is coming through, that it can serve those particular individuals. Along with that, we highlighted the fact that there are major institutions that are there now that people frequent, support, and are critical to the health and success of the corridor right now, including Market Basket, BJ's, Amazon as well, that's been coming along in the corridor, that those are assets that we think are going to help as this corridor continues to proceed forward. Looking at the site as well, there's a lot of asphalt, a lot of parking lots, that as we rethink what the area could be, there's a lot of places where new opportunities can occur, whether that's new buildings or new placement, parks, streetscape, all of those things, that we have the opportunity in place given that there are a lot of spaces that are underutilized and could serve a better use going forward into the future. Finally, we wanted to highlight this in terms of Remy Marsh, that there is the ability to have access for both cyclists and pedestrians in terms of having trail access. So was highlighted to us a lot during the discussions today was the Northern Strand Trail, which connects Malden and Revere, and the desire to have some use such as that in this part of the corridor as well, understanding that the marsh, which may not initially come across as being an asset, is a green space. It's something that people would likely want to go through, have recreation in, and do we have the opportunity here to connect all the different considerations that we have in mind with that space as well. We thought that was an asset. Now, on the other side, looking at some of the challenges, some of them we had highlighted with the traffic and the subsequent pedestrian and safety issues that brings about of trying to improve that condition as well for this corridor. The number of parking lots, hardscape spaces there present a number of challenges, including the fact that there isn't a lot of landscaping, trees, grass that is attractive for people to see and interact with as they're going through this area, that can accommodate rainwater, stormwater, that, you know, in its absence leads to flooding and other issues as well, that is common in very hardscape areas, that is problematic on a regular basis. That's something that we wanted to address in our recommendations. Additionally, looking at the number of uses and buildings, as we mentioned, there are a lot of different businesses that are of similar use, whether it's fast food or nail salons or whatnot. They're also being put next to uses that you may not typically see them next to, such as a BJ's or the DPW site or housing complexes that are there now. There's a lot of activity there, but it seems as though it could be better coordinated and connected, not just through new streets or new landscaping, but just in terms of placing uses next to each other that make sense, that will likely go together well. So that was a challenge that we highlighted as being existing there right now and something that we wanted to address going forward. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Drew, who go forward with the recommendations. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. Sorry, Jim.
On to recommendations. So the next slide. We were asked 3 questions that Emily had introduced at the beginning, and what were presented to us weeks ago when this application was submitted. We actually moved the question 3 to question 2 because we felt like answering 1 and 2 together made sense on the next steps that we'll go through. And we kind of came up with a phased approach, a phase 1, 2, and 3, to identify these opportunities to enhance the area's diversification, the housing, retail, how to outline clear urban design goals, affect the corridor's identity. There were also 2 sub-questions in there about the infrastructure and roadway, transit access, building, MBTA. All of those were tied into that we felt connected with now our new 2 here, which is the feasibility, reclaiming, and repurposing green space, which you have a large green space behind the site, and connecting that with the bike path. So phase one, it's really now or yesterday through the next 3 years. Conduct studies are the first part. This may be considered a study at some level with professionals coming in and giving kind of a backbone, but this is kind of giving you a 36,000 foot in the air kind of view of what we think you should do. These studies should look at parking, market analysis, the Mass Dot corridor review, hydraulic study, area master plan. That will tie into the next phase 2 and 3. We also create temporary activation using that hardscape, that parking area, those parking lots, underutilized right-of-ways, and also start creating the new zoning area. And that really hits on question 3, which we'll get a little bit more detailed on that later in the process. But to address it here, the zoning uses are fairly checkerboard. You have highway business and the different business zones across the street, what makes them a single-family residential. So our proposal is creating a whole new zoning concept for the area, and we'll get into that. The other part of phase 1 is begin conversations about linking the infrastructure improvements. One thing that was loud and clear was aging infrastructure. That was one of the issues and challenges, the water and sewer line, the Mass Dot, and as you go along with single project updates, that can happen through over time, not immediately overnight, but it is a process, and those conversations need to be happening now. Another part of phase 1 is planning the pedestrian and bicycle connection. There is the Northern Strand Trail that could start connecting its way towards Squire Road, and this might be a much longer process, but getting that connection going and working with DCR and all the wetland issues and green space and everything you need to work through to connect that bike path. And then as you'll see in some later planning and drawings we have here, we have a concept of a green space and kind of a town center, but what we really liked, not town center, sorry, community center, but one thing that we really latched on is the city's new fitness center right there on Charger Street, kind of using that as your pinpoint location to affect change throughout the whole neighborhood. There's a lot of areas where you can start. There's a lot of adjacent parcel owners. Northgate's owned by many different owners. Well, the city actually has control of a site. They're putting in a fitness center. Let's start there. This also ties in the concept of biking and walking, being healthy. So we like the idea of that being kind of the cornerstone for the beginning of phase 1. And then finally, working with those property owners. It's starting now, so this will lead to benefits down the line in phases 2 and 3, but working on cleaning the vacant lots, doing temporary landscaping, doing some public art or other temporary uses, which we can get into that in the next slide. This is the Northern Strand, the picture of the map there. If we go to the next slide. Temporary uses being, fake grass rolled out, have some lounge chairs, some containers where you could have food and maybe an outdoor beer garden, things like that where you have some activation in some open space to kind of draw people here, kind of immediate cleanup, immediate activation of making people think of coming to this area, not just driving over it.
Just to add to that, if I can, a lot of communities have been looking at excess parking that's not really being used well and saying, what can we do with this on a temporary basis? So they'll have a food truck festival, they'll have a music festival, they'll use it as event space. Quite often they're doing it in these sort of areas that feel forgotten to let people know that there is an asset here, there is a draw here, and with the types of businesses that you have, the Market Basket, the BJ's, some of the other restaurants in the area. There's a real opportunity for partnership for periodic events in the area. You've already got the parking, so it's just a matter of repurposing some of it. Jim?
Yeah, exactly. And this is all, again, phase one. It's the beginning phase. There's a lot of planning to do, a lot of beginning of streetscaping, cleaning up, and drawing attention to the area. I'll turn it over to Drew, who has the tougher job of phase 2s and 3s, putting bigger plans into action. So I'll turn it over to Drew now.
Great. So after that extensive planning and community engagement effort in phase 1, phase 2 is about beginning to implement some of those exciting designs and changes. First, we're focused on a redesign both of the above grade and below grade infrastructure on Squire Road. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We found that the existing MassDOT public right-of-way is anywhere between 100 and 120 feet. And there's great opportunity to design a road diet that will also allow for landscape buffers, pedestrian improvements, and opportunities for cyclists, as well as addressing some of the concerns that we heard from community members and city officials, primarily related to pedestrian safety, vehicular maneuverability, as well as stormwater runoff. Some of those landscaped areas could act as rain gardens, but also noise and pollution buffers from all the traffic that moves through Squire Road and surrounding corridors on a regular basis. We then want to promote enhancements and connections across Squire Road. There's only 2 crossings of Squire Road today that leads to a lot of traffic and congestion in the surrounding neighborhoods. And by creating more connections across from the southern side to the northern side of Squire Road, you're able to provide safer crossings for pedestrians. You're able to slow the rate of car travel through this corridor and make it more appealing to people who are looking to shop or spend time in this area who aren't arriving strictly by car. All that work needs to be done with partnerships, right? Adjacent land and business owners, MassDOT, which controls the public right-of-way, but focused on a strong planning effort. Those discussions can come smoothly and lead to great success. And I think that engagement then continues as you look to the northern side of Squire Road, with engagement between adjacent business and property owners as they look to take what we felt was a sea of parking and break it into smaller pieces. We look at opportunities to begin to add infill retail within those spaces, bringing it out to Squire Road, not having it buried deep in these power centers and parking lots. And that would always benefit from the pedestrian and cyclist improvements as well as the landscape buffers that would be created through that redesign. Lastly, it would be at this phase where we're making the connections to the northern strand. Our team has proposed a connection that would be made from behind Northgate along Route 1, connecting close to the Quarrystone Overlook area and the park that sits there. And so you'd be working, again, with MassDOT and the community partners that you're already engaging with on Squire Road to make these enhancements and connections for the community. Here's an example of what that road diet may consist of. Squire Road at the Route 1 rotary and the 107 rotary is a 4-lane road, but with turning lanes and other additional travel, it becomes anywhere between 6 and 7 lanes wide as it comes through this corridor. We propose keeping space for a turning lane, but shrinking the road so that you're able to provide landscape buffers, as you see here, as well as a separated bike cyclist track and pedestrian and sidewalk enhancements. Not only will that make it better for residents that are living south of Squire Road, it will provide additional opportunities for retail and business owners that aren't strictly reliant on car-dependent uses. Next slide. We begin to sketch out what these opportunities may look like. The enhanced connections across Squire Road are seen here in pink, going north-south. We also propose Ward Street extending through the Market Basket site to Northgate to provide better access that doesn't rely on everyone exclusively using Squire Road to move through this corridor. As you can see, we also propose bringing retail uses closer to Squire Road that can benefit from the pedestrian and bicycle improvements and landscape buffers that will be made, and also proposing future opportunities for connections close to the recreation site. Again, breaking this part of the city into smaller blocks that would provide greater opportunity for future redevelopment that Emily will talk more about when we talk about zoning. Next slide.
If you go back to that slide, just one thing to highlight, there's the green and the blue in there, with the green kind of being part of the phase 1 into phase 2 for the bike path connecting to the northern strand. That blue, a multimodal bike pedestrian roadway, and then kind of future planning it down towards the beach.
Yep. Yeah, and to Jim's point, those connections extend all the way to 107. Again, trying to extend the city grid, which exists in all other aspects of Revere, and bringing it to this quadrant and zone. And as these blocks break down, we want to provide additional enhancements. So we're proposing a community green where no green space exists today. And as you'll see in future phases, in phase 3, better enhancements along the marsh, which we think is a great asset of this location. Next slide. As part of this phase, I think there's opportunities to work with existing property and business owners about how they can consider different uses of their existing buildings. We looked at precedents in and around Boston for ways that these spaces can be activated with a focus on entertainment and community activation, and came across several breweries that have sprouted up in big box-like buildings. Here you're looking at Riverwalk in Newburyport, which is a very popular brewery, and also has outdoor activation in its parking lot during the summertime. Next slide. We also highlighted all of the success and excitement around Night Shift Brewing in Everett, as well as the Steelcraft Container Park, which is, as Jim pointed out, an activation of a hardscape space with temporary structures to bring people, excitement, and entertainment to an existing location. Next slide. As we move into phase 3, we build upon those initial connections and roadway improvements that are built in phase 2, and we promote additional development uses. We know that existing property and business owners need to see that there's an opportunity for them as we propose change in the area. And so we look to activate these spaces with ground floor retail and community uses while proposing office, lab, and residential spaces on the floors above. This would also come with enhanced community improvements, which includes the town common and park adjacent to the Rumney Marsh, and the full connection to the northern strand. Next slide. So you can fully see the proposed blocks here. Again, the main neighborhood streets and corridors are in pink with those connections going across Squire Road. There's an interior circulation in orange that provides smaller block sizes and promotes walkability within this section of Revere, as well as the enhancements with the community green and the park space at the connection to the northern strand. Some of the larger blocks, again, we propose for possible office, lab, and R&D uses. So you're bringing jobs, you're bringing development, you're bringing additional tax base to this part of the city. Next slide. Regional precedent images and opportunities. We looked at the redevelopment of University Ave, also known as University Station in Westwood, which we feel like there's a lot of similarities to Squire Road. As you see in the site plan, they have big box power center uses towards the rear of the site, but they brought smaller, more walkable retail closest to University Ave with a landscape buffer and pedestrian improvements, breaking up otherwise a sea of parking. We would envision something similar to University Ave as part of a phase 2 improvement. As additional development takes place and the street grid is built out, we see Assembly Row as a strong precedent example for this part of Revere, where you have park space and community and regional connections closest to the Rumney Marsh. In Assembly Row, it's the Mystic River. You have a mix of retail, entertainment, housing, office, lab, and parking in structured garages, not in surface parked opportunities, and a variety of density and heights that is pushed furthest away from the existing residential neighborhoods that exist in this part of the city. Next slide. These examples, for a pedestrian-centric development, you can see the park space on the left at Assembly Row, closest to the Mystic River, as well as walkable retail and mixed-use environments in Chestnut Hill. Next slide.
Drew mentioned a strategy for laying out the area and then thinking about how development starts to fill in those new blocks. So we're looking at how do you create a walkable place? How do you think about how the existing development can transform over time? How do you respect the single-family neighborhood and smaller business on one side of the road while taking the opportunity of these deeper parcels, the marsh on the other side? And then how do you create value for an area so that the changes to the streetscape, the installation of the green areas can be captured? And part of that creating value is thinking about rezoning the area. So as we look at the primarily highway business zone, that it's frequent for something like a highway business zone to be found elsewhere in a city, right? You don't have just one highway business zone. In looking at this, it's not so much about tweaking the highway business zone as it is about replacing it with new zoning that is is specific to this area. And part of that new zoning is restricting the current uses. So using those planning studies that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation to understand what an area master plan would be, defining the uses, residential, neighborhood retail and services, and local job development. So whether it's the office, R&D, lab, that coming in, and we're going to suggest also a program of thinking about how to support smaller local businesses as they grow, using the value that's created by some of these other uses to help create the ability to support those through the new development. So first is this idea of restricting uses, so removing from the zoning those that are no longer appropriate for this area. Then saying, if we give you a density bonus, we give you an additional height, and I'll talk about height a little bit more in a minute. If we give you relief from parking, and there's other things coming into that as well, would you be, for example, willing to give lower rent space on the ground floor to a commercial kitchen, to a business incubation space, some way of really tying the community in? So maybe you have a community center here that the city has sponsored that's giving classes to small businesses. Then you've got a space over here where they can come in and they've outgrown their home business. This is a place for them to come and continue to expand that. So you're starting this culture of entrepreneurship. That can't happen at market rate prices, so it has to be a conversation with a developer. If we give you the opportunity to do this type of development, can, as part of your community benefits back to the city of Revere and the neighborhood, provide this? Sometimes that's green space, sometimes that's interior space. So thinking of that is really important. Then creating incentives following on from that for desired uses, such as the breweries we talked about, those shared commercial centers, whether it's a density bonus or something else. Now, I mentioned parking requirements. The reduction of parking requirements really needs to be in conjunction with conversations with the MBTA. Because when we think about mixed use with residential now, the current requirement for 2 parking spaces per unit is high if you have public transit. If you don't have public transit, it's probably about right, but that is a lot of space devoted to parking that could be used for something else. So whether we talk about structured parking or podium parking where the building is underneath, or the parking is underneath and the building is on top, and there's some change in topography that might allow for that while still keeping an active use, but that's part of what needs to be studied, and how can we reduce the parking requirements, and that's the conversation with the MBTA. I also mentioned height, and so looking at this, you've got this slope downward with the single-family homes. You've got some 2, maybe up to 4 stories, we heard, for condo on that south side of Squire Road. On the north side, we think that the height should remain lower to address the fact that there is a different typology, a different way of looking at buildings on the south side, but that the closer you get to the marsh, the higher the buildings can go. They're stepped back from the neighborhood. Those taller units can get more value from the views for residential. That value can then support the activated uses on the ground floor in the green improvements. And we noted the flood zones. It's important to think about the fact that we have to consider that some of these developers are going to need to make improvements that benefits not just them, but the whole area. They're going to need additional value to be able to afford that. So even in a strong housing market, that is true. So how do we move the height upwards as you approach the marsh, keep it away from the community? We've now created an area with smaller, more walkable blocks with pedestrian and bicycle connections that are regional, potentially with regional transit. And then we've created new uses, neighborhood goods and services, jobs on site, that should actually keep people from having to drive as much, because more of what they need and want is right there, both for the existing neighborhood, but also for the new residents, the new employees coming in. And then finally, to make sure that all of this happens in the vision of an area master plan, is developing those site and building design guidelines that help ensure complementary development. We don't want it to be exactly alike. This is not a historic area where it all has to be gray shingles with white trim and black shutters, but the new buildings should be responsive to the old, and then as the old buildings change over time, they need to be responsive to the newer buildings. So having appropriate landscaping design guidelines, building design guidelines, stormwater management design guidelines will help create that consistency. So part of the funding will come from the development, but there's other funds available, and for that, I'll turn that over to Matt.
Yeah, so there's a number of funding sources. I'm representing Mass Development. They have a Commonwealth Places initiative, and that provides funding mechanism for community-driven placemaking projects throughout the state. There's also a CPA, or Community Preservation Act fund, and that helps communities preserve open space and historic sites, create affordable housing, and develop outdoor recreational facilities. There's also a Shared Streets and Spaces grant providing funding to municipalities and public transit authorities to quickly implement improvements to plazas, sidewalks, curbs, streets, bus stops, parking areas, and other public spaces. And then lastly, there's Community One Stop for Growth, which is a planning grant through MassWorks, or a Mass Downtown initiative.
So this is the result of what, a day and maybe 2 days' work, counting our outside work. So it's a very high-level view of what could be possible, and so certainly shouldn't be taken as this is absolutely going to happen now. But we wanted to give you our vision coming in of seeing what a more walkable, more connected area could be, something again that benefits the existing neighborhood, the existing residents of the city, but also future residents, future employees, and really becomes the asset that it should be. So with that, Jim, any
Yeah, I think you
words?
summarized it. I mean, it's, as noted in the beginning, there's pedestrian safety issues in the road, and those need to be addressed. And then it's looking towards the future of Northgate, and not just Northgate. We focused a lot on Northgate and the crossings there, but all the way down the road, connecting the two traffic circles and everything in between. I mean, you got some great anchor tenants and businesses throughout, and even going across Route 1 to Amazon and the bike path. There is an immediate need to fix the sidewalks and make Squire Road safer and better for everybody, but then also adding these other blocks to add other sources, road access, other avenues, and then other development.
So with that, turn that back over to you and John.
So this is a great high-level overview of the day today. There was a lot of prep work going into this, but obviously you were able to get that information and turn it into this great presentation. I think we're opening this up to questions, if anybody may have a question in the audience. I think what we all need to understand here is what the quick wins will be, and then what is the long-term vision and goals for the area. I mean, obviously, you were presented with a lot of stuff here tonight. We'll be looking at this closely and understanding where we can start applying for funding and what's the best way to do that. But we welcome any comments or any questions or any feedback, if anybody should have any.
So the question for the panel is, did you all take into consideration that DPW will be leaving from the Finnis area but then coming back rather than completely vacating it?
We assumed that DPW is staying in place, but the fact that the city owns the land opens up perhaps some opportunity for trails along there. Obviously, some operations might have to be shifted around to allow for that. We also saw that, and that was the green lines we showed, which when you get the report or see this online, you'll be able to see more clearly. There is a space between the community center and the apartments right across. That's part of that multimodal connection we were talking about, where it goes one way. It's probably pedestrians, bicycles, cars, but the other way, and this would actually link through some existing parking complexes, could be a green path for pedestrians and bicyclists. We see maybe with some partnership from the city, maybe there's a way of creating a connection to the marsh there. Again, high-level view, not fully understanding the operations, but we assumed at least in the short term that was going to stay there. We weren't planning on its moving.
So I can speak a little bit about that. So that has been a MassDOT initiative planning project now for the last 4 years. So it's going to be a little bit longer, I think, before that if they decide whether or not to actually extend the storage collection of that queue. So there's more space for cars to sit, to wait to take the left at that turn. It has been brought up. There's a couple of other MassDOT projects in the area, but they have not really done any community outreach, and I don't think they have actually conducted any traffic analysis of whether or not that extension of the left turn hand lane would even be feasible or doable on the corridor. So something like that, usually the ideas happen, and then it usually takes a good 2 to 3, 4 years before they actually, do the traffic analysis. But we can definitely keep the public aware of that. I think we also need to be mindful of the fact that there is some widening projects suggested for Route 1 where they are not actually adding a lane. They're just using the existing asphalt and repurposing it to allow for more cars to travel through there. You're welcome. Any other questions or concerns or comments? Yep.
It would still be a 4-lane road, two north, 2 south. It's just the distribution of the lanes would change, and they would come in a little bit. So one of the reasons it's easy to be fast on a road like that is that the lanes are quite wide, so you don't get that sense of speed. You measured it, Drew, at 120?
Right, yeah. So when we looked at Squire Road between the Route 1 rotary and the 107 rotary, it goes from 2 lanes going eastbound, 2 lanes going westbound, to 3, upwards of 4 with a turning lane. And we felt that we can still provide that turning lane and the same traffic capacity just by eliminating the 5th and 6th lane of travel. So it would be 2 lanes east and westbound through that entire corridor with turning lanes as appropriate. But as Emily said, the lanes on the road today are incredibly wide, or much wider than modern standards. And so it allows for greater rate of speed. And so by narrowing the travel lanes, you can naturally lower speeds on the road and enhance safety.
And add the trees. So the middle of it, there's maybe a shrub or 2. It's not well landscaped. And then adding trees as buffers between the kind of pedestrian bike area and the road. Visually, that slows people down. Right now, it looks like it's an open runway that I can just light up my gas pedal and get to point A to point B faster. But when you see the trees and the thinner lanes, it creates a perception to slow down. That's where the University Avenue idea came up with the Westwood site. That was a straightaway, big trucks coming through, people cutting through to cut off from 128 to 95, and now it's a lot better landscape. People definitely go slower. I live over in that area, so I know that well, and that really seems like a comparable site to look at.
Slowing down is...
Yeah, exactly.
And slowing down is when you also see people attracted to more of the retail and more of the opportunities in the area as they have a chance to actually look and see, oh, there's a shop, there's a food, let me go stop by.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, your traffic is a huge asset to you. You just want to convert those drivers into pedestrians and people who are going to spend money in your community. And you can't do that unless you slow them down.
And that really ties in that phase 1 of, temporary use of that space in the parking areas and whatnot to get people like, wait a minute, I can stop in between the 2 rotaries and maybe go to a brewery or go somewhere where there's a coffee shop or something temporary. It's nice out. is a good time in New England to be outside when we're not in the cold and dark. So it's a good idea to kind of activate that temporarily, and it kind of starts creating that there for that.
So I just want to bring up one point today in the panels, is that it was mentioned that, it would be great to have some activations in that area that are similar to like a Market Street or Assembly Row. Not that that's what it's going to be at the end of all this. I want to make sure that we're clear on it. It'll be something specific and unique for the city of Revere itself. But I think it's important to note another issue that had come up or was raised with the demographics. We had a couple of real estate agents here with us today who said, they were showing properties on Squire Road to rent, but those properties didn't meet the demographic in which that retailer or that shop owner or that developer was actually looking to attract. So even though there's plenty of cars traveling through the area, the space itself was not attractive enough to rent because of the demographics in the areas. But something like these activations, we're starting to see it now on Revere Beach. We're seeing it now on Shirley Avenue. We're even seeing it on the Northern Strand. These activations are diversifying the users that go to these places, that spend money in these places. And I think that's really one of the things that we in planning have to start thinking about is, how do we start to change the appearance of Squire Road, but that's a lot of diversification of what's there and understanding what is going to attract a diverse market base for everyone to access the area.
And that also goes to,
Yeah.
Emily, that also goes into this larger idea of wanting to change the perception around the area and attracting these uses. We can't tell you how many times during the, discussions today that we heard people saying, I don't shop here, I go to Market Street or I go to Chelsea. Why would you do that if you have the option here in Revere? And that's not something that, any of the city officials or any of the other folks in the Commerce Office are looking to hear when they're trying to have people stay in the city, pay for activities and services there, pay tax dollars here. We want to keep those uses, those dollars within the city, and trying to change the perception of getting people to understand that you want to shop in this place is going to go a long way toward changing that behavior, that people will stay instead of going up Route 1 or Route 107.
And Councilor, just one quick thing. Councilor, you mentioned how feasible is this? And that is a completely valid question to ask at this stage. Absolutely. It's an important one.
I appreciate the vision.
Yeah. Right. So that comes to the point of our first recommendation, which is the additional studies that we recommend. So a parking study to understand how is the parking in the area actually being used? Is it necessary? Can it be used for something else? Mass DOT's corridor study to say, look, what's here isn't working and needs to work. So how do we change that? We also mentioned a marketing study, and we haven't, as well as the area plan, we haven't really talked about that yet, but what can be critically important is if you want to attract new development, that these area master plans combined with a marketing study is really something that you can hand and say, hey, you know what? This is what Revere wants. We know the demographics for X are here because here's the study where we've done it. We know these are the zoning changes we can make that will bring more value because we've done this. The community's behind it because we've had these community conversations as part of the planning. We've done the hydrologic studies. We know what the flooding situation's going to be. We have the strategies and the costs. We have the funding sources, but we need you, the developer, to help us with this. This is now a marketing document. And not speaking for the developers on the team, but I've certainly heard from others that knowing what a community wants and that the community is prepared to take certain actions on their own makes it a lot easier to come into a new community.
Bingo. So John mentioned, for folks that can't hear it, about focusing on the future in Northgate and preparing really with the zoning so that you can anticipate the future changes. And that zoning piece of it is critical also to how to get this done, is that you got multiple owners in Northgate and the surrounding area. They see new zoning that allows maybe density in certain areas with incentive for commercial and local commercial on the lower floors. You're going to attract development into those parcels. And so planning the zoning now and starting that process, yesterday to get the area rezoned. We had, honestly, at first thought was talking about overlay districts, and we looked at it and we're like, no, this is not an overlay district situation. This is a zoning change for this area because you really have to plan for the future. We can't tell you as a community what you should put in your zoning, but some of the ideas that Emily had mentioned are what we think are good starting points. Maybe you latch on to one of those other uses that you really want to push into, but the more options you give for a developer, that they don't see they need to go through variances,
Yes.
but at the same time, you provide design guidelines so it doesn't change the neighborhood character in a way you don't want it to go to. You can give them some guidance to get to that point, and definitely looking towards the future is key.
Absolutely, the zoning needs to be in place first.
Yeah.
It's important to be able to say to the outside world, this is what Revere wants for this area. This is how we'd like to get there, and we'd love you to come in and join us, right? It's an invitation.
In some communities, I've participated these as a citizen of another community where they say, we want everyone in this neighborhood and business and residents to come in and a brainstorming session. And we got maps everywhere, and we want you to write on the map what you'd like to see. It's a lot more work for you guys on the planning side in the city hall, but it's a good way to get engagement and get ideas out there to see what people want to see, and that helps you kind of form your zoning change.
Okay, are there any other comments or suggestions, questions? So this is not the final for this process. There may be a day where the ULI panel will actually be coming back out and doing a little bit more analysis out on the site. Upstairs in the Department of Planning and Community Development, we are actually relaunching our website, so each business district will have its own page. We're working on the page right now for Broadway for the different projects that we have being launched for the Broadway Business District. A similar page for this project, the Squire Road Urban Land Analysis, will be developed where the initial application to ULI will be on the page. The report from today, the tour notes, that will all be on the page. And then any additional information as we go throughout the planning process, as well as our contact information. But this really, I think one of the things that we look at as a quick win, and I'm glad you brought up the Health and Community Center, because I think that that's really going to be a positive place to kind of start the change. And one way we can start the change is actually looking at a shared street grant through MassDOT to extend the sidewalks along Charger Street all the way to the new Health and Wellness Center. Maybe putting in a painted bike lane or something, a pilot bike lane to kind of understand how people are going to utilize that space. So those are some of the things that we're going to take back to the planning department and start looking at and understanding how we move people in and out of the area. But be sure to check out the webpage as we roll that out and we add more information onto it.
In our written report, usually, I don't want to overpromise, I was joking with Emily about that, but 6 to 8 weeks.
I think it said 10 to 12.
Now we moved it up to 10 to 12, but we will have a more formal written report. Tonight's kind of an outline of that report, but it'll have more meat to it. And that will be published on the Urban Land Institute site and shared with you and can be used and hyperlinked, and you'll get to see it in full form.
And thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate hearing from you during the day and the others who joined us during the day, and then from the rest of you this evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.